Have you ever wondered what the select action does? It might be one of the most underrated actions in Power Automate, and once you understand how it works, you'll start using it in almost every flow. In this tutorial, I'll break down what the select action does and walk you through 5 practical ways it can help clean up, simplify, and speed up your flows. The select action is an efficient way to simplify, transform, and format data into a clean, usable format. It streamlines your logic, improves performance, and makes debugging way easier. It has 2 modes. Map mode is useful when you want to clean up your data, rename fields, or shape it into a format that is easier to use later in your flow. Text mode is more straightforward. You choose a single field, like an email or a name, and the result is a simple list of those values. This mode is great when you need a flat list for notifications or dropdowns. To show you how the select action works, I'm using a compose action to hold a simple array of 3 items. You can follow along using the same array. I've included a link in the description box below, or you can use your own. Let's take a look at how the map mode works. Although this array contains name, city, and email address, I'm going to use the select action to return just the name and email address. The from field of the select action requires an array. Insert the output from the compose action above. In map mode, the select action requires a key and a value. The key is what you'll use in subsequent actions to access the value you've mapped. You can keep the same key, or to simplify your flow, you can adjust the key so it's easier to remember. For the first key, enter name. For the value, use an expression to access the name from the array. Use the item function followed by a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Inside the single quotes, enter the key, name. For the second key, enter email, and in the value field, insert an expression. Just like before, use the item function followed by a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter the key for the email. In my case, it's email address. Run a test. In the input of the select action is the full array, which includes all 3 values: name, city, and email address. The output keeps the same number of items but only shows the 2 values that were mapped: name and email. I'll cover how to use the mapped values later on in the tutorial. Next, let's take a look at how the text mode works. I have the same array in the compose action. Insert a select action. In the from field, insert the output from the compose action above. Click on this icon to switch from map to text mode. I'd like to collect the email addresses only. Insert an expression just like before. Use the item function followed by a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter the key of the value you'd like to output. In my case, it's email address. Run a test. The select action outputs just the email addresses. It's still an array, but this time each item is a single value. Regardless of which mode you choose, both map and text mode return an array as the output. Now, let's walk through some real examples so you can see how the select action actually works inside a flow. I have a SharePoint list that contains a mix of column types. In this flow example, I'm going to use a select action to pull out a few columns. In the from field of the select action, insert the value dynamic content from the get items action. In map mode, I'll add keys for the values I want to extract. For the first value, I'm going to use item for the key, and I'll insert the title dynamic content into the value field. Next, I'll enter status for the status key. There are 2 dynamic content options to select from: status and status value. The status dynamic content will return the object. To output the selected choice value, select the status value dynamic content. For the date, enter date as the key and insert the date dynamic content into the value field. For the last value, I'll enter assigned to as the key. The person column has a few dynamic content options to select from: person claims, person display name, person email, person picture, person department, and person job title. In this case, I want to output the display name, so I'll select the display name dynamic content. Run a test. To prevent Power Automate from displaying this warning, you'll need to define a filter query in the Get Items action. I'll enter this filter query for now. In the inputs, you'll see all the original data pulled in from the SharePoint list. In the outputs, it's only outputting the values that were mapped. This is helpful when you want to keep your flows clean, reduce complexity, or prep your data for something like an email or report. When using a select action in your flow, you can also manipulate the values like formatting the date, remove the dynamic content, and insert an expression. Use the format date time function. Unfortunately, the only dynamic content available to select from is body and value. To insert the date value into this function, we'll need to use another expression as we did earlier in the tutorial. Not sure what expression to use? Here's a trick. First, insert the dynamic content you want to use in your expression. Hover over the dynamic content label and take note of the expression. If you'd like to learn more about how to use expressions in your flows along with some helpful tips and tricks, check out this tutorial. Insert the format date time function. This function requires 3 parameters. The first parameter is a timestamp, the second is a format, and the third is the locale. The locale parameter defines how the number is formatted based on Power Automate's regional settings. This parameter is optional. If omitted, the system's default locale is used. Insert the expression to output the date value. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and the left arrow key to place your cursor just before the closing parenthesis. Add a comma and single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter the date format. I'll enter this format. You can customize this to suit your requirements. Run a test. This flow run will fail. Why is that? The format date time function requires the first parameter to be a string. However, in the SharePoint list, there are some items without a date. We need to first check the date column to see if it's empty before we can use the format date time function. Remove this expression and enter a new one. Use the empty function. The empty function takes a single parameter, an object, array, or string. Insert the expression to output the date value. Run a test. The empty function will output a true or false value. Now we can wrap this expression in the if function. The if function takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is a Boolean value, aka true or false. The second parameter is the value to output if the Boolean is true. And the third parameter is the value to output if the Boolean value is false. Enter if with an opening parenthesis. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and insert a comma. Pay attention to the tooltip when writing expressions. The tooltip will bold the current parameter you need to define. In this case, we need to define the second parameter, the value to output if the Boolean is true. If the item doesn't have a date, I want to output null. Add another comma and enter the format date time function. Insert the expression to output the date value and then add a comma and single quotes. Place your cursor just before the closing parenthesis and add a comma and single quotes. Next, enter the date format. Press the down arrow key and add a closing parenthesis to close the if function. Don't forget to press update to update the expression. Run a test. For any item that doesn't have a date, the value is null. If you want to display your data in a table, you might use the Create HTML table action. It's simple and works well for quick outputs. Working from the previous flow example, I'm going to add a Create HTML table action. In the From field, insert the output from the Select action. I'll leave the columns option set to automatic. Next, add a Send an Email v2 action to display the result in an email. Let's run a test. The output looks fine, but the Create HTML table action has some limitations. If you switch the column type to custom, the header field doesn't allow spaces. Also, if I want to highlight rows where the assigned to column is empty, I can't do that with this action. Instead, we can use the Select action to generate the table rows as HTML. If you aren't familiar with writing HTML, you can use a free tool to generate the structure. I've linked one in the description box below. For my table, I'll toggle on headers and set the table to 4 columns with a single row. Copy the generated HTML and paste it into a compose action. Remember to rename your actions to keep your flow organized. Let's focus on the header row first. Each TH tag represents a header cell. Replace the placeholder text with the actual column headers. Double-click to select the text between the TH tags. Now, let's move down to the body row. I want to replace the placeholder text here with the appropriate dynamic content. If you insert the dynamic content from the Get Items action, Power Automate will automatically nest the Compose action inside the Apply to Each action. This is because the Get Items action outputs an array. To prevent this from happening, we'll need to use expressions. To get the expressions, click on the 3 dots of the Select action and select Peak Code. For each dynamic content you need, copy the expression after the @ symbol and before the final quote mark. Instead of inserting an expression, paste the text from your clipboard directly into the Compose action. Repeat this for each dynamic content value. We'll need to compose a complex expression so it can be used in the Select action. When writing complex expressions, I find it a lot easier to do in the text editor as I can see the entire expression. Copy the HTML row from the opening TR tag to the closing TR tag. In the text editor, paste the HTML as we'll need to format it for use in the concat function. The concat function combines strings together. Each string must be separated by a comma. First, wrap each opening TD tag with single quotes followed by a comma. I'll use the find replace function to do this quickly. Next, wrap each closing TD tag with a comma and single quotes. Lastly, wrap the TR tags with single quotes. Add a comma after the opening TR tag, omit the comma from the closing TR tag. Wrap the entire expression in the concat function. Copy the entire expression to your clipboard. In the Select action, click on this icon to switch from map to text mode. Press Command or Control A to select everything in the map field and delete it. Click on the Expression tab and paste in your expression from your clipboard. Press OK. Let's run a test. Before I do that, I'm going to insert a terminate action right after the Select action. This prevents the flow from running further while I check the Select action outputs. Remember, the Select action outputs an array. We'll need to convert it to a single string using the join function. In the Compose action, delete the HTML for the body row. To convert the array into a string, insert an expression. Use the join function. The join function takes two parameters. The first parameter is an array, and the second is the delimiter you'd like to separate the array with. For the first parameter, click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the output from the Select action. Add a comma, and for the second parameter, enter an empty string. Use single quotes. Press OK. Delete the Create HTML table action and move the Terminate action below the Compose action and run a test. It's hard to determine if HTML code is displaying as expected just by reviewing the raw outputs. To preview the output visually, we can use the HTML table generator site to see how the HTML will render. Copy the output from the Compose action to your clipboard. Click on HTML Editor and paste your HTML here. You can verify how your HTML will display here on the left. If your HTML isn't displaying as expected, adjust your expression until it is before you continue building your flow. Now, let's add a background color for the rows where the assigned to column is empty. Because I'm inserting this HTML into an email, I need to use inline CSS. Most email clients don't support external or embedded styles, so inline styles are the most reliable option. Back in the text editor, I'm going to add a style attribute to the TR tag. This is what I want the final HTML output to look like when the assigned to field is empty. If I leave it like this, every row will have this background color. To apply this only when the assigned to column is empty, we'll need to use an expression. First, we'll need to separate the TR tag into separate strings. To do this, add a set of single quotes here and insert 2 commas in between the single quotes. Remember that the concat function will join strings that are separated by a comma together. Place your cursor between the commas to insert an expression. I'm going to enter a couple of line breaks to make it easier to see the expression. Just like before, we'll use the if function. The if function takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is a Boolean value, aka true or false. The second parameter is the value to output if the Boolean is true. And the third parameter is the value to output if the Boolean value is false. Insert the if function. For the Boolean value, use the empty function. Inside it, insert the expression that outputs the assigned to value. I'll copy the expression from here and paste it into the empty function. The empty function takes a single parameter, a string or collection, and returns a true or false value. If the item has an assigned to value, it'll return true. If not, it'll return false. Place your cursor right before the closing parenthesis and add a comma. For the second parameter, add single quotes, then paste the inline style. Make sure to include a space at the beginning of the string. Otherwise, the HTML won't be valid. Next, add another comma, and for the third parameter, use an empty string. Copy this entire expression to your clipboard. Back in Power Automate, delete the existing expression. Insert a new expression and paste the expression from your clipboard. Press OK. Run a test. I'm going to verify my output first. Everything is looking good. I'll drag the terminate action to the bottom of the flow and insert the output from the compose action into the body of the email. Run a test. Next, I'll show you how to use a select action to output multi-choice column selections as a string. Then, I'll show you how you can copy multi-choice selections from one list to another. And finally, I'll show you how to output selected multi-choice values in map mode. In this example, I'm using the getItems action to return items from a SharePoint list. When building out your flows, it's good practice to limit your items to a small number when possible to speed up your flow runs. I've limited this action to 5 items. Next, add an apply to each action to loop through the items. Insert a select action. I'll use the select action to output the selected multi-choice values. In the From field, insert the multi-choice dynamic content. Click on this icon to switch to text mode. Insert the multi-choice value dynamic content. Once you insert the dynamic content, Power Automate automatically nests the select action inside another apply to each action. This apply to each action isn't required. Drag the select action outside of the apply to each action that was automatically added. Now you can delete it. Run a test. Let's review the outputs of the select action. To output this array as a string, we'll need to use an expression. Add a compose action. This action is optional. You can insert the expression directly into a subsequent action if you prefer. Remember to rename your actions to keep your flow organized. Insert the join function. Select the Dynamic Content tab and insert the output from the select action above. Add a comma and single quotes. Insert the separator you'd like to separate each value with. In my case, I'll enter a comma and a space. Press OK. Run a test. Let's review the outputs of the compose action. It's looking good. However, I'd like to sort the selections alphabetically. To do that, we'll need to edit the expression. Wrap the array in the sort function. The sort function takes a single array and sorts the array alphabetically. Don't forget to press update to save your changes. Run a test. You can also use the same concept and apply it to a multi-choice person column. I'm going to remove the dynamic content from here. Insert the multi-person dynamic content into the From field. And in the Map field, insert the multi-person display name dynamic content. Just like before, drag the select action outside of the apply to each action that was automatically added and delete that apply to each action. I don't need to adjust the compose action as it's still referencing the select action above. Run a test. If you'd like to output the email address instead of the display name, simply insert the email dynamic content here. You can use the output of this compose action in subsequent actions of your flow. In this next example, I'm going to show you how to copy the multi-choice selections from one list to another. For this example, I've limited the top count to 3. I have an apply to each action that is looping through each item returned. You might think that you can simply use the dynamic content from one list and have it copy over to another. Unfortunately, if you do it this way, your flow will fail. Instead, you'll need to structure an array into an acceptable format. To find out what that format is, add a compose action. Insert the multi-choice column dynamic content. Run a test. The create item action requires a value key. Delete the compose action and insert a select action. In the from field, insert the multi-choice column dynamic content. In the key field, enter value, and in the value field, insert the value dynamic content from the multi-choice column. Since the values in the list I'm creating an item in has a different syntax, to match it, I will enter the word multi with a hyphen before the dynamic content. Just like before, pull the select action outside of the apply to each action that was automatically added and delete that apply to each action. In the create item action, click on this icon to change the mode. Insert the output from the select action above. Run a test. You can see that 3 items have been created and the multi-choice values have been assigned to the items. The structure of the array differs slightly for a multi-choice person column. Instead of value as a key, you'll need to use claims. In the value field, insert the email dynamic content from the multi-choice person column. Just like the multi-choice column, click on the icon to switch the mode. Insert the output from the select action above. This is also why it's important to rename your actions, especially when using multiple instances of the same actions. Things can get a little confusing if the actions aren't named in a way that helps you differentiate the outputs. Run a test. In SharePoint, 3 items have been created with the multi-choice people assigned. For this example, I want to output the display name of the selected people. However, the only dynamic content I have available to select from is this. Let's run a test to view the outputs. This won't work as it returns all the values for each selected person. How can we extract just the display name? First, I need to copy the expression for the multi-person column. Click on the 3 dots of the select action and select peak code. Copy the expression after the @ symbol and before the closing double quote mark. Now you can delete this dynamic content. We'll use the expression builder I created on my website to generate the expression we need. I've linked it in the description box below. This tool is designed to flatten multi-choice or multi-person columns into a string or array. All you need to do is select the column type, enter the dynamic content key, and choose the output format. For my flow, I'll leave the column type as multi-person and switch the property to display name. Then I'll paste the dynamic content key into the field. This builder highlights each part of the expression in different colors. This makes it easier to see how the multi-person property, dynamic content key, wrapper tag, and item tag are used in the expression. Since I want to output a string of dynamic names, I'll leave the output set to string. The wrapper and item tags can be customized. However, I'm going to leave it as is. Notice the if function in the expression. It makes sure the flow doesn't fail when the column is empty. Once the expression is built, copy it to your clipboard to use in your flow. Back in Power Automate, I'm going to insert an expression for the value field of the select action and paste the expression from my clipboard. Run a test. Let's take a look at the outputs of the select action. Any item that has people assigned will output the display names in a comma-separated string. In this example, I have a list of tasks. The assigned to column is a multi-person column. I'll use my tool to generate an expression to pull the email addresses into a string. Copy the expression to your clipboard. In the select action, click on this icon to change it from map to text mode. Paste the expression and press OK. Run a test. Remember that the select action returns an array of items. Each of these lines is an item in the array. The expression used returns a string of email addresses for each task. Some strings have one email, and some of them have multiple emails separated by commas. What we need is an array where each email address is an item in the array. This way, we can remove duplicates using an expression. We'll do this in 3 steps. First, we'll need to combine all of these email addresses into a single string. Then, we'll need to convert the string back into an array. Finally, we'll use an expression to remove duplicates. Insert a join action. In the From field, insert the output from the select action above. Join each item in the array using a comma and a space. Run a test. Now you have a string of email addresses, each separated with a comma and a space. Add a compose action. We'll use the split function to turn the string back into an array. The split function requires 2 parameters. The first parameter is a string to split. The second is the separator you'd like to split the string at. Insert the output from the join action above. Add a comma and single quotes and insert the separator. In my case, each email address is separated by a comma and a space. I'll enter that in between the single quotes. Customize this to suit your requirements. Press OK and run a test. The output from the compose action now shows an array where each email address is its own item. Add another compose action. We'll use this compose action to hold the unique email addresses. Remember to rename your actions to keep things organized. This is especially important when you have multiple instances of the same action. To get a list of unique email addresses, insert an expression and use the union function. The union function requires 2 arrays. This function will combine the 2 arrays, removing any duplicates. Insert the outputs from the compose action above, followed by a comma, and insert the outputs from the compose action above again. Press OK and run a test. The compose action now outputs an array of unique email addresses. Now you can use an apply to each action to loop through each email address. Your flow may look something like this. I've added another select action to transform the data from the SharePoint list. I've used the same expression that I used earlier to output a string of email addresses for the assigned 2 users. Inside the loop, I've added a filter array action to filter out all tasks assigned to the user being looped through. This lets me send a single email of all their tasks that are due soon. If you aren't familiar with how to use a filter array action, make sure to check out the tutorial I've linked in the description. I've also included another walkthrough that shows how to send multiple SharePoint items in a single email. For the last example, I'll show how the select action can format drop-down options for the post adaptive card and wait for a response action. On my site, I've published a sample adaptive card template that includes a drop-down. I've highlighted the parts of the JSON you can replace with your own content, whether that's static text or dynamic values. I've linked the template in the description box below. Click Copy to copy the JSON to your clipboard. In Power Automate, I already have a Get Items action that returns a list of departments from SharePoint. In the Post Adaptive Card and Wait for Response action, paste the JSON from your clipboard into the message field. Scroll to the Choices section of the dropdown. This is the structure we need our select action to match. Add a select action after the Get Items action. In the From field, insert the value dynamic content from the Get Items action. Add a title and value key and insert the appropriate dynamic content. In my case, it's the title. Add a terminate action after the select action. This is optional. I am adding this action so I can run a test without sending an adaptive card. Run a test and review the outputs of the select action to ensure the output matches what you're expecting. If you'd like to sort these alphabetically, in the order field of the Get Items action, enter the internal column name of the column you'd like to sort your values, followed by ASC to sort by ascending order. If you aren't sure how to get the internal column name, I've linked a video in the description box below. In my case, I'd like to sort by the title column. Run another test. Now the values are sorted alphabetically. You can move the terminate action to the end of the flow or delete it completely. In the Post Adaptive Card and Wait for Response action, scroll back down to the Dropdown section. Replace the hard-coded choices array with the dynamic content output from the select action above. Run a test. Since the flow returns all items from the department list, when a new department is added, it'll display in this dropdown. Currently, Power Automate doesn't provide dynamic content from the Post Adaptive Card and Wait for Response action directly. You need to use an expression to access the user's response. To make it easier to compose the expression, rename this action to something simple and omit any spaces. Add a compose action. This compose action is optional. I prefer using compose actions to test and view the outputs. You can use the expressions directly in subsequent actions if you prefer. I'm going to create a dynamic reference key to store the results from the adaptive card. To learn more about dynamic reference keys and how you can use them in your flow, check out this tutorial. I've also linked it in the description box below. Let's take a look at the previous flow run. Highlight the content after the data key and copy it to your clipboard. Paste this into the compose action. I'm going to keep the keys as they are. However, you can customize them if you'd like. We'll replace the static values with expressions to output the selections made in the adaptive card. First, insert the outputs function. Add single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter the name of the Post Adaptive Card and Wait for Response action. In my case, it's my card. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. First, we need to access the body. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Next, we need to access the data. Press the down arrow key again to go to the end of the expression and add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Lastly, enter the dynamic content key of the value you'd like to return. I can reference the JSON in my compose action. Press OK. Repeat this step for each dynamic content you'd like to output. To do this quickly, copy the expression to your clipboard, replace the dynamic content key with the appropriate values. Run a test. Review the outputs of the compose action and verify the outputs. Customize the expression to suit your requirements. For example, you can use the toUpper function to convert the text to uppercase, or format the date into a different format. You get the idea. Now I can output the values from this compose action into subsequent actions, such as creating an item in a SharePoint list, posting a message in Teams, sending an email, or even creating an event. For this example, I'll send an email. To output the value from the compose action above, insert an expression. Add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter the dynamic content key for the value you want to output. Press the up arrow key to go to the start of the expression. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and select the outputs from the compose action above. Repeat this for each value you want to output. You can customize this flow to suit your requirements. I've edited this flow to check a SharePoint list for the staff that match the selected department. The email will be sent to those individuals. Let's run a test. What are some other ways that you've used a select action in your flow? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like. Are you frustrated by failed flow runs? Not sure what's causing your flow to fail? Check out this tutorial where I cover 5 common flow errors and how to fix them. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on my next video. Thanks for watching!